National syndication may be efficient, but it's not personal. And when large Christian media companies abandoned local communities, they left behind stories worth telling and leaders worth knowing. That's why Lauren and I created a brand new nonprofit ministry called the Cleveland Ministry Collective. Through collaboration, coordination, and the Third Place podcast, we're lifting up local ministry voices and strengthening the work God is doing right here. Discover more, stand with us, and donate to this brand new effort at clevelandministrycollective.org. That's clevelandministrycollective.org. All right, let's get to it. Here's today's episode. This is the Third Place podcast, recording from the JLP CPA sponsored studio. I'm Brian Dolan, and right there next to me, Lauren Cuevas.
Home is your first place, work is your second place, and this is your third place, where the Christian community gathers.
We're with one of our very favorites, Dr. Mark Caleb Smith, who is Dean of the School of Arts and Humanities and Director of the Center for Political Studies and Professor of Political Science. He basically is running Cedarville University with all those different things. He's not at all if his boss is watching.
Correct.
You're in charge.
Right.
But thank you, Dr. Smith, for being back on the show.
Yeah, it's always my pleasure. Good to be with you.
Now, we're going to talk a bit today about executive authority when it comes to using military as law enforcement, because this is relatively new, at least in our lifetimes in American history. But before we get to that, okay, so you have all these things you do. You started off as a professor, like just a teacher.
Correct, right.
And like the classroom thing with Socratic method, I would imagine you give your students primary documents to read and then you discuss them.
That's right.
And now you're a dean. What are you doing now as a dean? What do deans do? Are you assigning stuff to your staff to read and discuss? Or?
Oh my gosh, that'd be fun.
So I occasionally I have meetings with students and they will ask me things like, why can't you make this person do that? Or why don't you deal with this problem or that problem? And I'm like, you're under the impression that I have, power. A dean doesn't, I can't walk into someone's office and go, you're fired. That's not how deans work. That's not how chairs work. It's not how the academic world works. And so I don't really give people assignments. I'm really more trying to encourage people and leading them through hopefully persuasion, because I don't have a lot of, hard power, if we think of it in those terms. I have a lot of soft power, I hope. But it's mostly, I'm sort of a middleman between the university administrators, like the president, the vice president, and the faculty. And so I hopefully can see from both perspectives what the university thinks big picture versus what's going on within my area of requirement. And so it's an interesting shift, right? I mean, like you said, I started out my professional career purely teaching, and now I'm kind of a hybrid teacher, administrator, all sorts of things. And it's been a transition for sure. So what are the challenges for you? I mean, are you missing the classroom, or is it nice to have more of a balance, or what? That's a great question. I think it's a constant tension. On the one hand, I'd love to teach and only teach, because I probably get more fulfillment out of that than anything else when you get right down to it. It's like when I roll out of bed in the morning, it isn't to be a dean. Honestly, it's not the thing that motivates me the most. But I also really enjoy getting to play a leadership role, help structure the vision for the university, help people think clearly through what our programs look like, what kind of courses we should be offering, how going through the hiring process and promotion and tenure process. And so I think I'm relatively good at those things as well. And so I do enjoy having that kind of ability to lead. But the classroom is, I think, my true joy compared to everything else. What do
people call you now? They call you Dean Smith? Is it
Dr.
Dean?
The people who are old don't call me Dean Smith because they realize that was a basketball coach back in the day who was very, very famous at the University of North Carolina. But people who are young, which maybe you're young, Brian, I don't know.
Well, yes, I am.
People who are
actually
young, who don't remember Dean Smith, do occasionally call me Dean Smith, and it always rankles me just a little bit. So I don't prefer. Dr. Smith is good in the academic world. Mark is always good as well. So, yeah.
Does your wife call you Dean? Does your kids call you Dean now? Do you insist on it?
So when I got my PhD, I threatened to have doctor tattooed on my forehead. So everyone would have to call me doctor for a while, because you do go through a little bit of title, covetousness to some extent early in your career,
Sure.
but that's long gone. So I really, I don't want to be overly crass. As long as you're not using 4-letter words of other kinds, I'm probably okay with whatever you call me.
I had a season where I wanted to get a PhD, and I had a couple of people trying to encourage me to do so.
Yeah.
But then I realized the only reason would be I'd like the title. And that's just not a good reason to spend like 60
Right.
grand.
No,
It is
it's
not.
really
No. That's the
Although the
worst
title's pretty
possible
cool.
reason.
The title's cool, yeah.
That is the worst possible reason to get a PhD.
When I was in college, there was this myth that would go around that if your professor was a doctor, he was allowed to be 15 minutes late before class was canceled.
Yeah,
And if he wasn't a doctor, it was 10. They only allowed 10 minutes. And my dad was a professor without a PhD, and he was like, what? Because our brains are bigger? It takes them longer to walk? What do you mean they get 5 more minutes? Like, no, that's not true.
Well, wait a minute, though. He's heard of this.
No,
Is this true?
No. Yeah. That's the norm. That's the expectation.
It's so funny.
If you have a
wow.
PhD, you get a little bit more deference in theory. So I don't know how fair that is, but
Well, you're
I
thinking
will say
deeply.
we do occasionally lord our titles over other people when it's appropriate and fun. So
Sure.
it does happen. Yeah.
I also, in college, our dean of students was Dean Ahrens, Arens. My friend thought his first name was Dean.
That's right. Yeah.
I
I
know
was
that
like,
happens
no,
a
that's
lot.
his
actually.
title.
Yeah.
Now, as a point of transition, if you were frustrated with a particular professor or maybe wing of the Arts and Humanities building, could you assemble campus security to enforce your policies? Could you?
So I'll get really nerdy, I suppose. We were just going over Federalist number 78 the other day in my constitutional law class. And there, Alexander Hamilton says the judiciary is the least dangerous branch because it has neither the power of the person or the sword. It only has judgment. And that's much closer to my power. I only have judgment. I have no ability to affect pay, no ability to fire, hire. So I really cannot mobilize campus security as much sometimes as I might choose to. I'd like to, yeah.
People imagine you have a red phone, right? That's security. Enforce my policies. But gosh, yeah. And that was super nerdy and yet so awesome that you just pulled out Federalist 78 from the back of your head and you're.
Yeah, I appreciate
It was 78?
that.
Was that what it was?
It was 78, yeah. And I thank you for the compliment, but there are very few people who would compliment me on that, and I'm fully aware. So, yeah.
Well, so now you actually pointed to something I think people don't realize because the court has been given so much influence in terms of society today. But correct me if I'm wrong. This is me trying to remember something, and it's so remedial. But without an early court case, was it Marbury versus Madison that established what the authority was? Like early on in our republic, the Supreme Court was like, dare I say, lame. Like people were like, what a bunch of losers. They can't do anything.
Yeah, they had as much power as a dean at a college. Yeah.
Seriously, though, right? I mean, I'm just
no, that's
silly.
right. That's right. No, that's right. So they actually had a hard time staffing the court because people would prefer to be members of Congress or even go into the military. And so they had a hard time sometimes finding people who would serve on the Supreme Court. It just wasn't seen as really what we would today call a co-equal branch of government. It was more of the third branch, and no one really wanted to be in it. And it isn't until Marshall takes over the Chief Justice's role, and I think cements the court as a co-equal branch in Marbury versus Madison. But even that was contentious and took a long time to kind of evolve from there. But by the time we get into the 1820s, 1830s, the court is really functioning more as a truly equal branch of government at that point, and they've elevated themselves to a degree. But yeah, you're right. Unquestionably, earlier in our history, the third branch is definitely the third branch, no doubt.
And they don't have any means of enforcing their judgments, right?
I mean, they have really limited means. The judicial branch could find someone in contempt in some situations and maybe put someone in jail for contempt on a temporary basis, but that's really unusual. And so they have the marshals who sort of work for them to some degree, but they have limited authority. And so they don't have a Supreme Court police force or Supreme Court army that can go around and enforce a decision. Their decisions are really only abided by just out of custom and out of maybe political necessity. And maybe let's sometimes say good civic mindedness, but it's apocryphal. But at one point, President Jackson is rumored to have said, Mr. Marshall has made his decision. Let's see him enforce it, about a decision the Supreme Court had made with Marshall. And there's a lot of truth to it. They're just, if the president bucks up and says, you know what, I don't really care what you've done. What can you do about it? There's not a lot the court can really do without the assistance of Congress at that point.
So other than love of country and honoring the Constitution.
And shame.
Yeah, and shame. There's really
Yeah.
no reason to listen to the
Yeah.
court.
Yeah, I mean, I would have said maybe 20 years ago, fear of impeachment. But I think that ship has sailed. The last 3 or 4 decades have shown us, I think, that impeachment's a bit of a dead letter. You know, it's there, but it's hard for me to imagine either party truly impeaching and removing their own party's president. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to what you said.
And now, okay, so with that in mind, slightly related, let's slide over to the executive branch. Have we ever had an era of history prior to today where the president would deploy the National Guard, like federalize the National Guard to use for law enforcement purposes within our borders?
We've seen presidents federalize the National Guard in some limited circumstances and maybe close to law enforcement. Maybe the best example is during the Civil Rights era. I think Dwight Eisenhower federalized the National Guard once or twice to deal with things in Arkansas and some other places. He also used regular Army troops at one point to do some things.
Really?
But and we occasionally see presidents federalize the National Guard during a disaster. And so they may go to assist what's taking place after a hurricane or an earthquake. And then sometimes their activities can veer kind of close to law enforcement, depending on what's going on. But generally, we've had a pretty strong separation between the idea of law enforcement on the one hand and the idea of using the military on the other. And National Guard has almost always been seen more as that military conception more than law enforcement. And I know for most people listening, they're probably thinking, well, those things feel like they're similar. They're really not similar. Traditionally as well as legally.
Okay, so why are they not similar legally?
So when we think of law enforcement, like a police officer or an FBI agent, they have the ability to arrest. They have the ability to turn someone over to authorities for indictment or for trial. They can coerce people as citizens on the spot, so they could detain someone, and they can then, if necessary, pacify them. That's just part of their regular power. We don't really think of military people functioning that way domestically at all. Even when they're brought into these kinds of situations, it's almost always to protect property or to protect other people, not really to directly engage with citizens and use force potentially on citizens. That's just not it's not part of our tradition. Now, you do see it in other places. It's not all that unusual. You know, if you go to Europe or go some other places, you may see military folks functioning almost like police officers. But we have had a long tradition where that's just not the same universe. And again, it depends on how nerdy you want to get. But this really goes back to the founding and to the arguments about the Constitution. And there's just a lot of hesitation about what to do at that point.
Tell me more about that hesitation from the founding.
Yeah. So if you think back, boy, we're going to turn this into a discussion of Federalist Papers, and I have to be really careful. If you think back to Federalist number 10, Madison is making arguments about the size of our country and how he thinks the size of the country will actually help it be governed well. It's a long, complicated argument he gets into, but he thinks size is a benefit. One of the anti-Federalists goes with the pseudonym Cato, writes an extended argument against Madison and basically says, you know what, size is going to be a real problem in our country because we won't be able to enforce the law well unless we have a strong standing military. And we all know that strong standing militaries tend toward tyranny and abuse of power. And, you could look throughout history and we can look at coups that have been instituted by militaries. We could look at militaries as sort of being an instrument of oppression. And that's what Cato and many of the founding generation was worried about. You create a big army to enforce the law, and there's just no limit to their power at that point. And so there's this and of course they had already gone through an experience with Britain. The reason that Britain had troops here was to enforce the law. There was we were resisting paying taxes. We were resisting the other, laws that they had passed, that Parliament had passed. And that's why soldiers were on our soil. And that's what they were really afraid of. And of course, they had a history of quartering of soldiers and warrants being issued by soldiers and lots of abuse of power in that environment. And they were terrified of that. So the argument was really, do we need a big military just to make the government work? And we initially started with this idea that, no, we won't use the military that way at all. And so you see a pretty strong separation between the military on the one hand and federal law enforcement on the other.
So it sounds like it's a pretty uniquely American approach to what military does.
I would say that it's uniquely American in our context when we did it. I'm not going to claim to be an expert on what other countries do in the sense of, I'm not a comparativist, but I think that model has filtered its way into other societies that have adopted similar constitutions. And so you do see similar decisions that were made later. But we made a pretty direct choice to separate these things.
Well, and I think part of this as well, we're so distant from the founding of our country, right? People don't remember the controversy of why we have an amendment to the Constitution. I don't remember the number, I should. That soldiers can't compel themselves to stay in your house, which
right.
I was using as a joke with my daughter. I saw a funny reel. She's in
I sent it to you.
You sent it to me.
Yeah, I did. I said, just in case Grace gets a little out of hand, you
Yeah.
can use your amendment rights.
What is it, the fourth?
It's the
I
Third
said, kick
Amendment.
her out.
Yeah.
The Third Amendment.
Close your door and lock
Yeah.
her out if she's being rude
Yeah,
to
I was
you.
like, you better be nice to me or I'm going to Third Amendment you. You can't be quartered here in my house. But talk a bit about that time for us of what the British military was doing to colonists when we revolted.
So I will. I'm happy to do that, but I have to tell a quick story. There's this really great book called The Year of Living Constitutionally, where this guy tries to live his life for a year as if he was living in the founding era. And he tries to go through, like he tries to carry a musket around. He does a whole bunch of crazy stuff just to sort of get people to think through what that era was like and how the Constitution functions and doesn't function. And it's a really funny book. But he actually goes to find a soldier. He goes to a place where soldiers are congregated and asks for someone to quarter in his house so that he can go through this whole thing. And he actually gets this random guy I think he's a National Guardsman. He agrees to be quartered in his house for like 2 days so this guy can claim that he's been quartered and then have a constitutional violation. It's just really, really funny. So I don't remember the name of the author, but it's a great book. So The Year of Living Constitutionally. Yeah, I mean, we were worried. The British military imposed itself on our citizens, and to the point where they could say, we're going to commandeer your house, we're going to stay in it and use it for a command post, and you can leave or suffer the consequences. Maybe if we're peaceful, we can coexist here, but we have the official authority of the crown to take over your property on the short-term basis. And they abused that authority pretty dramatically. They also had general search warrants, so they could show up and be suspicious of something and issue a search warrant on the spot and then just search your premises and all of your property, really without any justification, under the authority of the crown as well. And so those things really shaped our colonists, as you might expect. And so the Third Amendment, the Fourth Amendment against searches and seizures, the Third Amendment against the quartering of soldiers, you start to see where those things grew out of. And so we've always been suspicious of just unrestrained military power and unrestrained law enforcement power. And that's part of why I think we developed this tradition that we did, of just trying to separate those things and create as many checks and balances between them as we could.
I've always been scared of a police officer, like, I need to use your car. I didn't ever
In the
think,
movies, it happens all the time.
I know.
Get out.
Yeah, I didn't ever think I needed to be scared of a military person coming to my house.
Yeah, but it happened all the time, right? I mean, it happened so often that the founders said, we better write this down.
Yeah, but it's interesting. Again, I know I have a really low bar for what's interesting, so I'm aware whenever I use that
I'm
word.
right with you at this, so we have a low bar together.
But it's interesting that that's also the only part of the Bill of Rights that has never been what we call incorporated against the state and local governments, because it's just never happened. Like it was there in the Third Amendment, but we've never really had an instance where a government has tried to quarter soldiers in someone's private property to the point where they've been sued. And so that sort of the Bill of Rights just has sat there since we put it in place, and it's really created no precedents and no legal actions around it, which is pretty interesting.
It's probably one of the more clear amendments,
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
I mean,
hope.
defining free
You'd hope.
speech is harder than get out of your house, it's mine now.
Yeah, you would hope.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so then help those who don't really understand the National Guard understand that. Who's in charge of it? I thought it was a governor, they might say.
Right.
Yeah, it is. It is the governor. So, we can take our walk down amendment lane. The Second Amendment, right, it begins with this prefatory clause about a well-ordered militia, well-regulated militia, and then it gets into the right to bear arms. The National Guard really grows out of that militia concept, that states could have a militia, could arm the militia. Now, I'm not arguing that's all the Second Amendment means, so please don't, if people are really touchy about it, I don't want to put you in the hot
He's
seat
trying to
here.
take my guns.
Yeah.
He's trying to take my guns.
But it at least suggests that the part of the Second Amendment was there to make sure that a militia could form well under the state's government. And that we saw that throughout our early history. The National Guard grows out of that tradition. Governors do control the National Guard within their state, but they can be federalized. And so the president can go through a legal process, say, I'm federalizing the troops, the National Guard troops from Ohio, and now you're under my command, and I can even deploy you, which we've seen in recent wars that we've been in, where National Guards have been deployed overseas and in theaters of combat. And so they can be federalized, they can be deployed. They are under the control of the governor, but only up to a point.
Yeah, so what can the governor do with them? Like, it seems, for most people, it's like, it's weird. Like, what's Governor DeWine going to do with the National Guard?
Thankfully, not a lot, right? I mean, if we had to use the National Guard a lot, it's probably a bad sign for our culture and our society. They're mostly there to do training, to be support for the active military in the case of deployment and in the case of a war or an insurrection or an invasion. So then we have another deployable military force that isn't active duty. So, National Guardsmen, just like reservists, they're typically part-time soldiers. They're not there all the time. They serve the state. They're going to take care of disaster relief. They're going to take care, maybe in some cases, for maybe large events, like a major national event, you might help use the National Guard to sort of structure an environment or provide some kind of security to an environment. But they don't get deployed a great deal. They mostly are going to be training more than anything else.
In COVID times in Illinois, the governor used them to do COVID shots at like giant arenas or whatever.
It happened in Ohio, too.
Oh, really?
That's right.
I got my shot from some 18-year-old kid that
In
had no training at all.
In cargo pants.
Yeah.
With the little boots. Yeah.
Yeah, it was actually as a quick sidebar, it was one of the more awkward moments in my life. This kid gives me the shot, and he's like, you want a sticker? And I thought it was kind of like a I voted sticker. Like, I got the vaccine. I was like, okay, yeah, I'll take one. He hands me a sticker, and it's Baby Yoda.
Oh.
It's just a little Baby Yoda sticker. I was like, well, wait, no, I'm a grown up. I don't need that. I don't.
It's like at the doctor's office when you get your shots.
Yeah,
to make you
I was good, but come on. So
That's
weird.
That's a good use of taxpayer money there. Yeah.
Right. Baby Yoda stickers.
Well, and I mean, I'm finding how vastly ignorant I am of things like the National Guard too. Is my daughter just went through all of her training at boot camp, and it's the same boot camp for National Guardsmen.
Oh.
Yeah.
A bunch of her friends in boot camp are National Guard, and one of them was recently deployed when he got back.
Oh, wow.
That's right.
So it is part of the deal. But now, Lauren and I want to take a brief moment before we continue today's episode to thank our sponsors. First of all, did you know I have a brand new morning show? That's right. It's called Upliftd Mornings with Brian. And our sponsor is Upliftd Stream from KHCB Media Group. We're so grateful for their sponsorship and their attention to my new morning show. Check it out weekdays from 6 to 8 a.m. Central, 7 to 9 Eastern. We have a lot of music, worship music. We've got scripture. I have devotional thoughts, try to share some funny stories, dad jokes, Bible quizzes, things like that. For more information how you can listen to my new morning show on the Upliftd Stream, just go to upliftedstream.org. That's upliftedstream.org, or just download the KHCB mobile app. We also want to thank our sponsor, JLP CPAs. If you're a small business owner, you already wear dozens of hats. You don't want to have to worry about things like taxes, payroll, financial reporting, budgets, balance sheets, all those kinds of things. Let our friends at JLP CPAs take care of that for you. They're a firm focused on small businesses. They're a local Northeast Ohio company, and you ought to check them out so that you can focus on what you're good at in your small business. For more information, go to jlpcpas.com. Again, jlpcpas.com. And finally, we'd like to thank our friend David Safransky and Edgewater Investment Group for being a sponsor of today's episode. Have your finances been overwhelming? Are you stressed about your future? You should talk to Dave and his team at Edgewater Investment Group. They'll help you with things like budgeting, retirement, investing, and they'll be honest and straightforward. So you want more information about how you can get connected and get their help with your future financially? Go to edgewaterig.com. Again, that's edgewaterig.com. Thanks again to our sponsors, and now we'll keep going with today's episode. As you were talking about the courts earlier, that really don't have the authority to enforce their judgments and their decisions. Why does the National Guard listen when the president's like, okay, you're mine now? Like, what mechanism does the president have to enforce that?
I mean, I think there's sort of the deal when you sign up, you know that that's a possibility, right? So you already know when you get involved that could happen. That doesn't guarantee that they're going to like it. You know, I think I saw some reporting from when President Trump deployed the National Guard in California. So he basically said, you know, Gavin Newsom, I know you don't want me to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. Federalize the National Guard in California, deploy them to Los Angeles because of unrest, he said. And there's some reporting that the National Guardsmen who were deployed were like, yeah, I don't really know what I'm doing. I don't like it. I wish that I weren't here at some level, but these are the orders that we've been given, and we're gonna follow them to the best of our ability. And so, and of course, that created a whole other legal controversy because Newsom sued, and that's part of the discussion as well.
What did he sue for? Because he's saying they're under my control as governor, not yours? Is that what he was saying?
He actually sued, arguing that they were being used to enforce the law, that they were being misused legally and not the way that they were supposed to. And we had a federal judge rule just last week, if I'm not mistaken, that the district court ruled that it was actually an illegal deployment of the National Guard. Now, that's going to be appealed, and I'm sure the Supreme Court's going to have to weigh in on this most likely. But yeah, there's actually a lot of interesting stuff that came out of that case.
Do we have much Supreme Court precedent as to what the boundaries are for National Guard deployment?
No, we really don't. I mean, the closest thing that we have that I know of is that Lincoln essentially declared martial law during the Civil War, and there's a lot of controversy about how he was using it and in what environments he was using it. Could they function as sort of law enforcement plus judicial authorities on American soil? And that created some legal tension. But obviously, Civil War and habeas corpus is slightly different than what we're looking at right now. So, but no, we don't have a lot of precedent that deals with this at all.
So talk to me about where we are currently. Where has the National Guard been deployed, and under what authority has the president done this?
Yeah. So right now, I think we still have some National Guard deployed in California. I think it's a couple hundred that are deployed still. And then we've had others have been deployed in D.C. I should say the D.C. National Guard's a little different animal. You know, as you said, the state National Guard is under the governor's control. Well, there's no governor of the District of Columbia. D.C. is a federal district. It's more like a federal state. The Congress actually regulates and manages the District of Columbia. And so there is a D.C. National Guard. The president has easy use of them without really much controversy whatsoever. And so he's deployed the D.C. National Guard in D.C. But then you probably saw in the news, some governors of states have also sent National Guard members to D.C. as well to help in that process. I think even in Ohio, if I'm not mistaken, they sent some National Guard troops over. And they're there right now, the president says, to get at the issue of crime. So they're there to help protect DC citizens against the crime that the president says has been a problem. And he's, of course, now saying he's going to deploy National Guard in Chicago and Baltimore and potentially other cities because of the crime problems that they're having. Now, the authority that he's using, he's claiming that the crime is so bad that it has created an emergency. And he's arguing that that emergency gives him the ability to deploy the Guard as he sees fit, even if it's in these almost law enforcement capacities. And that's really where the legal argument's going to come from. So what he's doing in DC is a lot more defensible legally because of his direct control. If he does this in Chicago, it's gonna certainly create a lawsuit.
Now,
oh yeah, Mr. Pritz will sue.
yeah, I mean,
yeah.
anyone watching the news can see the contentious, at least public relationship between Governor Pritzker of Illinois and the president. But I guess the problem as well is the speed of the courts, right? So you have a president who can declare an emergency. So that gives them some sort of constitutional authority to do this. But what recourse does a governor have? I mean, you send the troops, you're the president. It's going to take, what, a year to get a recourse to this?
So, I mean, you're right at one level. I think that's been part of Donald Trump's approach to power in his second term, is just do things and then force the courts to catch up. And in that span of time and the delay between his actions and the court decisions, he's just doing what he wants to do to some degree and waiting for someone to say no. And I think that's the approach he would take here. Now, the Supreme Court even can expedite things if they choose to. And so they do have a docket where they can say, okay, we're not going to go through this typical process and ask for briefs and give months and months for everything to sort of work its way through the system. Instead, we're going to do this fast and we're going to make a decision quickly. They could at least make an initial decision about whether or not, there should be an injunction applied in this particular situation pretty fast if they want to. But you're right, for the whole thing to play out, for a long opinion, that could definitely take months or years in some cases. But we've also seen them act, when we think of election controversies, for example, they've settled those really quickly and have turned around opinions within a week or 2 weeks. So, depending on what they want to do, they can do it fast.
So when it comes to the president is deploying National Guard troops, and do they have any authority to actually arrest, or is this just simply an issue where they're going to try to intimidate criminals? Or
so, I mean, let's look at it. Let's give the best case scenario for the president. Let's kind of put it in the best light that we can from his point of view, and then we can counter that. He's going to argue that they're not really there to arrest people. They're there to provide order, to discourage crime simply through their presence. That having more weapons on the street, having more authority, more people in uniform on the street is going to have a beneficial effect on the place and deter certain kinds of crime. Now, we could argue with all of that, but, I think we would probably also agree that we have crime problems in many of our cities, probably too much crime, too much murder in our cities, and sometimes the police forces there do struggle to sort of stay on top of that. And in some cities, it's worse than others. Now, Chicago, probably not one of the worst in terms of homicide rates. Sorry to tell you, Cleveland, I think, was in the top 10 of homicide rates in a list that I saw recently. So,
oh, no.
But Dayton was also pretty high up there, which is close to us. And so, but that's going to be his argument, is they're not going to function purely in law enforcement capacity. Now, through this lawsuit that happened in California, the commanding officer of that National Guard, he did say that they had been instructed to carry out what he thought were law enforcement activities. And so that's part of some tension, as we don't fully know exactly what those soldiers are being told when they go into this environment. But I think the president's going to try to argue they're not really doing law enforcement, but we may eventually see evidence that they actually are. Now, if we push against that from the other direction, I think if the president were trying to deter crime in, say, the District of Columbia, he would send soldiers into the areas where most crime happens. But I think if we look at how soldiers have been deployed in D.C., they've been deployed around metro stations and on the mall and in other places which are not really your hotspot places for crime. And so it makes me think they're really there for a visible presence more than they are maybe to actually deter in some cases. And so this is going to get very contentious very quickly. But yeah, I think the worst case scenario, if they begin to do things like arrest people, detain them, turn them over to police, then we're looking at pure law enforcement at that point.
Yeah, 'cause I
And
guess my
from everything I can
question-
tell, that's just illegal. It's just illegal under the federal law.
Yeah, because my question would be, okay, a National Guardsman is like standing outside a store and they see someone go in.
That's right.
And they come out with merchandise and they've just stolen it.
That's right.
So technically, they're supposed to just stand there. Their presence is just supposed to deter them. Well, it didn't. So now, what are they going to do? They're probably going to try to arrest them or detain them and make them stop and turn them over to law enforcement. Like, just
That's right.
standing around doesn't do anything if you don't have any power to do something about it.
And they have no legal authority to arrest.
That's correct. Yeah. Now, I think they have a legal authority in some cases to detain someone, you know, if they're being threatened or if they're seeing an act of violence and they're preventing violence from happening. But yeah, it's a really murky situation. I don't know precisely what their rules of engagement are, but I know they can defend themselves if they feel like they're under threat. I don't really think they're able to engage people directly beyond that, but you know,
I
we'll
also
see.
think places that are riddled with crime like this, it's not just usually people who just want to do crime for crime's sake. It's like poverty and the ways they've grown up, and it's just what they know, and just people standing around isn't going to deter them. I just don't think some National Guardsmen standing around is going to make them stop living a life of crime.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Because they still live it when they know police are around.
that's
Correct.
right. Yeah, that's right.
It goes to understanding why crime is happening. But
Right.
a lot of people, I don't think, care to ask that question. They just want the crime to stop. But really, I mean, as a guy who loves the social sciences, you have to dig down deeper, right, into causality. So what is causing crime waves in communities? Has anyone started to figure this out?
You know, like most interesting things, it's multivariate, not univariate. And so there's going to be multiple causes that go into it. Some of those causes are going to be individualistic. Some of them are going to be communal. But certainly you're going to see it associated with rates of poverty. You're going to see it associated with family structures and the household that people were brought up in. And so all these things are going to go into it for sure. And, you know, I just as a person who teaches constitutional law, what I always tell students is we can make America completely safe if we have enough soldiers with enough weapons on enough street corners. Yes, it might be safe at some level, but then what are you sacrificing for that safety, right? I mean, there's always a balance between safety on the one hand and then freedom on the other.
Control,
And
yeah.
to some extent, when we do more safety and more security, we're giving up elements of our freedom. And, you know, I'm not saying that's what's happening right now, but at some level, when I see a soldier perched on a street corner, I got to look at that. I got to think through, okay, what am I doing? How am I going to approach this? And how do I need to be careful with what I'm saying, with how I'm walking? I don't want to run, right? I mean, what's going on?
Yeah.
And it just starts to change the culture, I think, when
Yeah.
you get right down to it.
In Israel, they have like 18-year-old
Yeah.
girls with giant machine guns just sitting, it's like perched
Yeah.
in like a shopping center.
Yes, it's everywhere, actually.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, when I think philosophically about like the role of the president, right? The role of president is the executor, and it's not a will, but the executive to enforce laws.
That's
okay?
right. Yeah.
So they're also swearing to defend the Constitution, which is the people. So what do we do in America when we have a municipality, a state that's not fulfilling its duty to protect its citizens? I mean, couldn't you philosophically say that becomes inherently the role of the federal government to protect the citizens?
Yeah, I certainly think in some situations you could make that argument. I think then you get into a question of means, right? What's the best way to do that? Is it going to be through the use of the military, or is it going to be the use of additional funding for law enforcement? Is it going to be maybe sending in federal law enforcement, like people from the FBI or from other elements of federal law enforcement, to do something that's a little bit closer to what they do as opposed to someone in the military? We do see instances sometimes where either the state government intervenes into an urban area, or the federal government might have to intervene occasionally. But it just doesn't happen that often. And the reason it doesn't is because in our system, states and cities are a product of states, legally speaking. They have some degree of sovereignty. They have some degree of their own independence. They're not purely just there to be an administrative unit of the national government. They have their own sets of powers, their own sets of interests in our system. And generally we respect that.
So then, I mean, as we look at this legally, constitutionally, and let's slide in more explicitly, at least, the scriptural New Testament believer part of this. Let's presume we have some major crime issues in municipalities around the country.
Yeah.
What does Christian advocacy sound like when it comes to issues of crime?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we see even in the Old Testament, right, the prayers for justice. You look at Habakkuk, for example, and he goes to God and he says, hey, I'm seeing injustice everywhere. What are you going to do about it? And I think that's a proper response is we want to pursue justice. We want to pray for justice. And I think we have mechanisms in place to help that. Voting is one of those for sure, but it's only one of those. And it kind of, it'll depend on how murky you want to get. But to some degree, we're talking about what role does government play in these situations and what role is it really about culture and about these other things that are maybe more fundamental than government. I often quote Barack Obama because I thought in this one phraseology, I think he was exactly right. As he said, when a gangbanger fires into a crowd of people, there's a hole in that young man's soul. Like there's something more going on than just simply crime. There's something spiritual that's happening there that we need to address. And I think that's where Christians can play a meaningful role. And I'll use myself as an example. I've lived in an urban environment in a few instances in my life. Lived in the middle of New Orleans, have lived in Washington, D.C. for a while, have lived in Waukegan, Illinois, which was pretty interesting all by itself. And those are complicated environments to live in. I think a lot of Christians, and again, myself included, sometimes you want to get out of those environments to raise children, to afford housing and do other things. And so we've seen in some of our bigger cities, Christians pull out of those environments and say, we're going to settle into the suburban life. And I can understand why, frankly. But you wonder whether we have maybe lost some of our salt and light effect in some of these communities. That doesn't mean there aren't Christians in those environments, but I do think in some of our big cities, you do see a lack of, let's say evangelical presence isn't nearly as strong as it would have been 50 years ago or 75 years ago.
Well, to me, it's also a heart disposition issue, right? Because sure, the word justice is all over Scripture, but I see, and this is just me anecdotally, you can both correct me on this, but when I see justice discussed, it's usually God warning us to make sure that the oppressed and the poor are treated with justice. Yeah. Not that we punish those bad guys. Where I think modern Christian culture, we're more looking at wealthy Christians going, well, we need to punish the bad guys. Well, no, shouldn't we be bent towards passion towards the oppressed and the poor?
We do, justice for them? We do. And I don't think you're making this assumption, but what you said almost assumes there's a disconnect there. In other words, if I really love my neighbor, I want to pursue justice to protect them. And they may be poor. I mean, the people who suffer the most from crime are generally the poor who are in areas that are going to have the consequences of this crime more directly than people like us. Mm-hmm. And so we show love to them, I would argue, by having a good justice system that then does punish people who commit acts of crime because it allows those other folks to live a much more life of flourishing than they would otherwise. And so I agree with you. What you're saying is let's just say people on the left might focus on helping those who are poor. People on the right might focus on crime and law and order. Those things are connected. And I think that if we don't see them as connected, we're missing an opportunity to, I would argue, give the full witness of Scripture. But again, as you know, that's ideologically complicated.
Yeah, because we'd rather use modern political ideology to separate ourselves than Scripture because it's more complicated, right? Because it sounds to me like you're saying the heart motive of the believer calling for justice against the criminal is the heart motive is because the poor have been oppressed by this particular individual and taken advantage of. It's not because I'm mad at you for making my city unsafe. I'm mad at you because you've hurt my neighbor.
That's right.
Yeah.
Which I don't know that I see a lot of that in modern society. It's hard for me to think that way.
Because the crime is affecting the poor.
That's right.
Not affecting
dramatically.
Right.
That's dramatically. That's right. Now, I would recommend to you and to your listeners, there's actually a Cedarville alum named Matt Martins. He's a lawyer in Washington, D.C. He wrote a book on reforming the criminal justice system that was out a year or 2 years ago. He's been on campus to speak about it. Matt's a really good guy. It's a tremendous book. And the first couple of chapters of this book, he lays out this argument that really loving your neighbor is pursuing justice. And these things are not disconnected at all. We have to see them as linked to one another in order to really approach this question meaningfully.
Because a singular, like, punitive, get the bad guy disposition runs contrary to the gospel itself, because I'm the bad guy and I deserve punishment.
That's right.
And so we have to get that right. And we've actually spoken to him years ago. It's a compelling book, especially for a believer to see somebody who's got such...
Like a year ago.
Is that how long was it?
Yeah.
Wow, okay.
Life, I know.
Life is fast. But no, I mean, just even the idea of how much of a mess the criminal justice system is, of how many people are compelled into plea bargaining as opposed to getting a fair trial.
That's right.
It's just,
That's right.
The whole thing is a mess, and it ought to freak us out as Christians. So perhaps when we're worried about crime, we're just like looking at the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Not that it's wrong to care about crime.
That's right. I would say not looking at the whole thing.
There it is.
We're looking at only at a part of the thing, and we need to look at all of it in order to have a much more comprehensive view, because these things are too complicated to just fall into easy ideological solutions. You know, if solutions were easy, we would have solved them, right? So they're not easy, and we have to be more careful about it.
Yeah, because I'd say middle-class people are going to say things like, I want the crime to stop so my kids can walk the streets and my kids are safe at school.
Get it?
And
Yeah, completely.
we can go shopping on
Absolutely.
the Magnificent Mile in Chicago. No, I want the crime to stop. Yeah, for those reasons, but also because my neighbor, who is in poverty, their children are dying on the streets in gangs.
That's right.
Not just about my kids, but what about my neighbor's kids who are dying because of gun violence?
Well, and I mean, Scripture is pretty clear that I'm supposed to be more concerned about others than myself as well.
That's right.
That's a hard one to live out, but it's very true.
That's right. Yeah.
Goodness.
Love your neighbor at least as yourself. Yeah.
Yeah.
And even explicitly, Paul saying, consider others more important than yourself.
Right.
That's right.
But again, it's hard in our selfish nature to have that disposition. Look at us. This was so cool. Dr. Mark Caleb Smith, we've taken so much of your time, but I want to be sure we spend a quick moment telling people why they should send their kids to Cedarville University under your deanage.
Under your
Deanage?
deaning.
A deanage. That's interesting. Yeah.
Deanitude?
I like deanitude. I'm going to have to remember that one. I'll tell my children that I was deanituding today. See how they react.
I like that. Yeah, very good.
I think Cedarville, there are a good number of Christian institutions in the country. I think Cedarville, I'm not sure I'd say is unique, but I think Cedarville is really unusual. We have a really nice balance, I would argue, between academic rigor on the one hand and a deep emphasis on spirituality on the other. And I think we put those things together in a way that you just don't see at a lot of other institutions. Mm-hmm. And when people come to our campus and they sort of experience what I'm talking about, that's the overwhelming reaction is like, wow, I had no idea really what you were getting at till I saw this, and I understand what everything means now. And I think the stats are when people come step foot on our campus, like 80+% of them come here as students. And I think it's because of that sort of dual mission that we have. So it's a good place to be. I'm blessed to teach here, or dean here, however we want to say it. And people should really look into it if they have children of that age.
I have a friend who's a professor, and I said, hey, you should look at Cedarville. Not only because I want you to live here, but also they're really great.
Oh, it's a beautiful campus.
Yeah.
And you guys have the advantage of you really are kind of in the middle of nowhere. So when you drive there, it's like cornfields. I'm stuck in soybeans. And then
Soybeans.
It's like this beautiful campus appears
in
the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. It makes no sense. It just makes no sense. And that's what one of our former presidents always used to say. Only God could have made this happen because there's no other explanation for it. And I honestly think there's a lot of truth to that.
Well, then from a parent's perspective, it's also kind of like, I send my kid there. can't really get in trouble. Where are you going to go?
To the
You're
soybeans.
going to go run around the soybeans?
Go get drunk on
That's right.
soybeans.
That's right. Run in
So-
the cornfields. That's right.
Go check it out, cedarville.edu, cedarville.edu. Thank you, Dr. Mark Caleb Smith, for your time today. We're so grateful.
Yep. Always my pleasure. Thank you.
And before we sign off, Lauren, we got to remind folks about us as well.
Yes, you can find more about us at stainedglass-media.com, stainedglass-media.com. We'd love to help you start your podcast, or you can become a sponsor on this podcast, on our other podcasts. We do have others. Go find them there. We'd also love you to become a Patreon member. For $5, $10, or $15, you get bonus content. So cold opens, that's just our chatting with our friends before we get started. There's ad-free episodes. You heard that right? Ad-free episodes. And you get the moron moment. We've got videos with Daria. I've got 2 I got to go post of Daria today. So lots of stuff over on Patreon.
Wonderful. And that'll do it for today's episode of the Third Place Podcast. Hey, before you go, don't forget, this episode was made possible through our brand new nonprofit, the Cleveland Ministry Collective. If you want to support our efforts to connect and uplift Northeast Ohio ministries, would you consider a tax-deductible donation? We could really use your help launching our new ministry. Give today at clevelandministrycollective.org. That's clevelandministrycollective.org. Talk to you next time.